Okay, welcome back, folks. So, at this stage, we have the basics of the game. We've a start, finish, reset. We've got our physics working, but we obviously, this is not in itself a Rube Goldberg machine, but we've kind of set up the basic framework that will allow us to create that. One thing I'm going to do at this stage is, because we're going to be messing with physics quite a bit, I'm going to turn off the start screen, and on the ball, I'm going to set simulated to true. And that's just because basically we're going to be doing this basically a lot. We're going to be running the game testing because these are a type of game where you try things, test it, see what's going to work. I'm also going to disable this level goal, and that's just because what I don't want to happen is to reset the level every time I get to here. Instead, we're going to look at kind of what we could do from there. So one thing I'm going to do is basically, if you look at the ball at the minute, its physics is just default physics. There's one thing we can do to create some custom physics, and that's if we go down here to the project and go 2D and create physics material 2D, and we'll call this ball phys mat or something like that. It doesn't matter too much what you call this. I'm going to just drag that onto the ball, and if we click the ball now and we see the circle collider 2D, it is ball phys mat. So the friction here is 0.4. If I press play, you'll see that the ball slows a little bit as it rolls. It has a little bit of friction on it. If I set this to 1, it's not going to roll much at all. It rolls a bit. But it's not quite as rolly as we might want. If it's 0, it's going to be a very smooth roll, basically. Okay, it's a little bit hard to see, but you can hopefully see that there. And then bounciness here, this goes from 0 to 1. 1 is pretty much totally bouncy, kind of a bouncy rubber ball. And if you see what happens here, the ball now just bounces along things. We probably always want this to be below 1, I would guess. And for this first ball, I'm just going to set bounciness to 0 and friction to 0. So that's like a ball bearing or something. It's quite heavy. It doesn't have much friction. That's kind of what I'm thinking this ball is, or what this ball represents. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this square here, and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm maybe going to put that there, and I'm going to duplicate it again. And actually, yeah, I'm going to put that there. That's fine. Again, we don't have to be too accurate with this. And what I'm going to do is, from this object, I'm going to turn this into a spring, basically, so that, actually, you know what, I'm going to move this down a little because I want the spring to compress a bit to kind of shoot the ball up. And I'm going to make both of these a little bit narrower so that they kind of are a bit more spring-like. See, we can test all this stuff out. So I'm going to add a component here, and it is a spring joint 2D. A lot of this physics stuff is available in 3D as well. So this is going to add a rigid body and stuff like that, and we'll see how this works in a second. But I'm going to just come down here to the spring joint, and it says connected rigid body, and I want that to be the square 2. Oh, sorry, that doesn't have a rigid body yet. So I need to add a rigid body 2D to this. This body type, instead of dynamic, I'm going to set it to kinematic, and that means it's not going to fall or be simulated by gravity or anything like that. But it still exists within the physics of the world, and it can move and stuff. I could probably set it to static without any issue. I don't think it matters too much in this case. So I want the connected object here to be this, and let's see, we're going to change a couple of things here. We're going to just press play and we'll see how this default spring looks. I think we're going to have some kind of funny behaviors here. Okay, well, that in itself is a funny behavior. So this is what I mean about us needing to play the game quite a bit. So the ball completely missed the spring, basically. So let's try moving it to here and see if we get the ball heading off it. Cool. So we have that kind of basically working at a very, very, very basic level. So on this rigid body here, there are some constraints. So I'm going to freeze the X position of this and the Z rotation. That means this is only going to be able to move up and down. It's not going to be able to rotate or anything like that. So that'll fix the first issue we're having there with the ball just kind of floating off it. Cool. And we're getting kind of some sort of like spring-ish effects off it. So the dampening ratio here is to do with like how effective this is to bounce back. So I'm going to set this to 0.5. And we'll hit play. That doesn't necessarily give us what we'd like. In terms of mass, I'm going to just see if I set this to 0.1, what sort of effect we get. So basically if the spring compresses quicker, it might give us a little bit more force to... You know what? One thing I'm going to do with this, the spring is probably too narrow, so the ball is already moving too fast horizontally. So let's do this. Oh, that's not a thing we want. So the... let's select this and the top one, and we're gonna set enable collision. Auto configure this should be fine, and auto configure distance should be fine. Yeah, so let's see if that works. Okay. Okay, cool. So it's kind of working. It just doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily... Why is that setting the distance to be so small? Let's turn off auto configure distance and see as we change this value. I gotta turn this off as well. Okay, so that anchor for some reason there is not necessarily quite working the way we might expect it to. Oh yeah, sorry, that's disconnected to this object. Distance, let's see, something like that. And basically we're just going to play around with things here. We're going to change the frequency. Let's just hit auto on both of those because it actually... So frequency, let's start increasing this so that it's a bit more bouncy, so it should bounce back quicker. And we'll reduce the damping ratio to 0 to make it a bit more springy. I think we'll have to change this distance value here because it's not... Yeah, we're getting some bounce there, it's just our distance is currently too short. 0. I think the defaults are giving us a funny result there, so we'll just see if this works a bit better. One thing is... I just want to check... Again, this is one of the things about this type of game is there's a lot of kind of fiddling around with like trial and error in terms of eyes. Okay, we're getting a bit of a bounce out of that. And like this, so we're going to use this to cross over this and duplicate this. So basically our ball's going to fall down, bounce down here, and hopefully, yeah, that will do it. we need to get a bit more bounce out of that spring. So I've just tweaked a couple of the values there, just by pausing the recording to save you seeing the trial and error, basically. And I kind of moved the platforms around a little bit until I got what I wanted. So one thing is I decreased the mass of this platform itself. I think I had it a little higher. I think I had it maybe 0.05 or something. And that means the ball is just going to push it down further, which then means the spring is going to kind of be able to push it back up with a little more force. And then the spring joint itself is configured here. This is showing some of the distances, and a frequency of 8 and damping ratio of 0 seem to give me a good effect. And I'll show you how that works now. We're basically able to bounce, the ball's going to roll down, hit off the spring, and get bounced up across the edge and go to there, basically. So that is that part of this kind of level for now. I'm going to make that a little bit longer. Actually, I'm going to make that a good bit longer. And what we're going to do is build a fan here. So I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to call it fan. And actually, I'm going to select the two of these and create empty parent, and I'm going to call it spring. And if I want, I can drag this into my assets, and I now have a spring prefab that I can bring into my scene and place it kind of wherever I want, if I want to have like multiple springs operating in here or something, which is kind of useful. So then this fan game object, I haven't put anything in it yet. The base of this fan is going to be I'm going to go game object, 2D object, sprites, and I'm going to go a flat top hexagon. I'm going to make this a child of the fan and make sure all the positions are set to 0. I'm going to hit F, and I'm just going to change a couple of the values here. I'm going to do something like this. I'm also going to move the fan to something like this. So that's going to be like the base of the fan. Actually, I'm not too happy with that scaling. So something like that. I'm then going to go game object, 2D object sprites, and I'm going to create a square. And this is going to be the switch for the fan. So I'm going to move this to like here. I'm going to scale it down to something like that. And inside in the sprite color here, I'm just going to make that maybe green or something like that to show that it's going to switch on the fan. Then I'm going to create another game object, and it's going to be a square. Maybe something like there. And then I'm going to go game object, 2D object, sprites, and I'm going to do a pointy top hexagon. And this is going to represent the fan. So I'm going to drag these inside this game object here. And this part that represents the fan, I'm going to make that maybe gray or something like that, just so that it looks a little bit different. And then I'm going to create a game object. It's going to be a sprite and a circle. I'm going to kind of elongate this, something like this. Cool. And then I'm going to create another 2D object. And I will do the flat top hexagon maybe. And this is basically I'm just going for simple sort of sprite shapes here to represent a balloon. I know it doesn't quite look like a balloon, but hopefully you get the gist. So I'm going to select the two of these, and I'm going to create an empty parent. I'm going to call this balloon. And with the two of those selected, I'm just going to change the color of them to maybe blue. And this circle, where is it? The balloon. I'm going to add a component. I'm going to add a circle collider 2D. Now, one thing is we can't change the radius of this. This won't be like a sphere collider, or like it won't match the shape of this exactly, but that's fine. We just are going to do an approximate collision of this part. So I'm going to just press play so that you can kind of see what's going on here. So the ball's going to go to there. Our ball's going to slowly roll, hit off that switch, and it's going to turn on the fan. So one thing I want to do with the square, whatever represents the button, I think I called it W by mistake. Yeah, I got to add a box collider to this. And now what I've done there is add a box collider. I need to add a box collider 2D. So just be conscious of that. Sometimes working with 2D, you'll end up hitting the 3D versions of things. And your Unity often doesn't do a good job of telling you about that. So I am then going to create an empty game object. I'm going to place it here. I'm going to add a box collider 2D. I'm going to set it to isTrigger. I'm going to add my trigger Unity event. Okay, the script we made before for ending the level, we can now use this. And what I'm going to do is select my, where is my CM camera? Sorry. I need to create a new Unity event. Drag and drop my CM VCam, my virtual camera in there. And City Machine virtual camera. And I can change the transform follow. Okay, and what this means now is it's going to follow the balloon. And just to check that this is working, I'm going to press play, and then we'll kind of start working on making this actually really work, so that the balloon moves. So we should see now the camera is going to transition, up to follow the balloon, which is great. It's kind of, it's the reason I do a lot of playtesting is, like, as I said before, I'm not necessarily a coder, but like I'm pretty good at getting things working, but it takes a lot of trial and error. So that's basically what we're doing here. We're getting things kind of up and running. So the next thing I'm going to do is create what's called an effector. But first I'm going to create an empty game object up here. I'm going to add a box collider 2D to it. It's going to be right above the balloon. And the balloon, I'm going to add a spring joint to this. Spring joint 2D. And then I am also going to do the same for this game object I've created. I just need to add a rigid body 2D. And again, this is dynamic, but I'm going to set its mass to 0. And I'm going to, was that mass to 0? Gravity scale I'm definitely setting to 0 because I don't want this falling, basically. And I'm going to freeze its position on the Y and freeze its rotation. And we're going to see how this will work in a second. So then I'm going to create another empty game object. Add a 2D box collider. And just going to make this something like this. And so my this game object that's going to pull on my balloon is there, So with the balloon selected, I've got the spring joint. I'm going to connect it to this object I created. I should really be naming these better, but basically you can see there that's connected to that. Auto configure, and we'll see how this works with auto configure. Yeah, cool. We're getting a little bit of bob there from the balloon, which is pretty much what we want. Yeah, cool. So this game object, I'm going to just change the name of this to effector. And I'm going to change the name of this game object to balloon mover. Okay, and this effector, I'm going to add a component called a area effector 2D, and it shows this arrow moving sideways. I need to check used by effector and is trigger on this box collider, and this force is going to be too strong, but we should see that this will drag the object that's kind of holding on to the balloon with the spring. Let's change that force magnitude maybe to 1 and see how this works. I think there's maybe a slight issue with how the balloon is configured, but we can fix the positions that the balloon is configured in, basically. So let's start changing some of these values. So that should actually be connected to there. We can hit auto configure distance and see how this will work. Okay, so we're maybe not quite as smooth as we'd like, so I'm just gonna tweak a couple of values here and then I'll come back with those values kind of fixed. So the issue there, actually, I kind of came across it straight away, is with this spring joint that's currently on the balloon. It has this auto configure property, which should automatically connect this to the balloon mover. So what we should see is like a green line moving up here, but for some reason it doesn't quite seem to be working right. So if I bring this up here pretty much to where the balloon mover is, and I'm going to just again change the icon on this so we can see it in the inspector as this sort of yellow diamond. And if I select the balloon now, yeah, perfect, I'd hit pretty much right on it. And now if we press play, what we should see is this balloon kind of float over to the right, because no, that was not it. Okay, let me just check. Oh, sorry, I moved the wrong anchor. That's my problem. Sorry, so this anchor should be where we want to drag the balloon from, which is there, and this one is from here, just the center of this. Okay, something like that, and that should fix it. So there we see our balloon kind of slowly floating away, basically. And it gives a nice kind of effect of being a balloon floating along the circle. I'm just going to make a little bit wider. Cool. And what we're going to do now is have this balloon hit off some dominoes. So I'm going to place this here. And then I'm going to create game object, 2D object, and sprites, and I'm going to create these as squares. And then place that down. I don't need to worry this much about where it's positioned, to be honest. And do something like that are going to be dominoes. I think every Rube Goldberg has to have dominoes on it. Now we need this one to pretty much be right on the edge, because we need to make sure the balloon is going to bounce off it, basically, and hopefully our positions are okay. But as always, we can kind of just tweak this sort of thing as we go. So I'm going to just duplicate, use that somewhere like that, that somewhere like that. Again, when you're doing this, like I've got uneven gaps here, you might make sure that you're always moving at the same amount by setting the X position to something quite regular. But let's press play and see. Oh, sorry, this won't do anything. And the reason it won't do anything is that I have not given these any colliders. So these need to have a box collider 2D, and they also need to have a rigid body 2D. So let's press play and see how that goes. Great, that's pretty much exactly what we had hoped for. So the next thing we can do is, with all of these selected, again, I'm going to kind of clean up the hierarchy a little here and just call those dominoes to try and make things kind of reasonably. So this is our fan, our balloon. Yeah. I'm going to select all these objects, the balloon mover up as far as the fan. Cool. I'm gonna give these all a single parent as well, and I'm gonna call this balloon fan. And that's not how you spell balloon, but this isn't spelling class, I suppose. So then I'm going to drag this into my project folder. Something funny there. Hopefully that'll be okay. I'm hoping that'll be alright, but I don't think it'll break what's here. It just might break something else somewhere else down the line. Then the other thing I'm going to do is select these squares. Any of these ones that are called square. And I'm just going to, again, create an empty parent. And I'm going to call this level platforms. Something like that, just so that my hierarchy is like neat and tidy. Hopefully you can see there like that it's kind of it's a little bit more manageable and a little bit more easy to understand. And you could create like an empty game object for like cameras and stuff like that, but we don't really need to do that. This is kind of fine. This is like as neat and tidy as we need to be. We'll also want to tidy this up in a couple of minutes. So what we're having at the minute is these dominoes are being knocked over. As you can probably guess, we're just going to duplicate this ball. And we're going to place it here. And just make sure that is, yeah, I think that's all okay. Yeah, we'll leave that start simulated, I think should be fine. And let's just make sure that works. We just want the balloon to hit off and make sure that that is going to knock this ball. And it actually mightn't. I'm wondering if it'll have enough force. Oh, it does. Okay, cool, great. Pretty happy with how that effect works. So then the levels platform, we can basically just duplicate this last square here, and we're pretty much gonna, for what I'm showing you today, we're gonna finish up here, just have a little like target area to end the game in. But when you're doing this yourself, like what I'd like to see you do is at least 5 phases to this, ideally more. Like the longer this is, the more cool it is, but I know there's a bit of work in getting this all right, and especially if you're kind of creating custom assets for it as well. One thing actually I'm just going to point out, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. So if I'm moving this with the move tool, with nothing clicked here, if I hold down V on the keyboard, you'll see that the cursor now snaps to the corners of the sprite, so it lets me vertex snap the sprite, which means that as soon as I get close to a point on another sprite, it's going to snap. And it just means there I've got kind of a perfect join. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to rotate it 90 on Z. And I'm going to do the same thing here, vertex snap that to there. And this is just going to be like the target, so then level goal I'm going to re-enable. And I'm going to pop that down here. So that once the ball gets to here, that's going to be the end of our level. And there's a couple more things I need to do. I just need to do basically camera transitions. So again, I'm maybe going to put yeah, probably what I'll do is put a trigger volume here and a trigger volume here, basically, so that once these dominoes are hit, the camera's going to maybe focus in on this middle domino, and then after that it's going to follow the ball till the end of the game. So to do that, I'm going to create an empty game object. I'll call this camera trigger. I'm going to add a box collider 2D. And hopefully you're all kind of able to predict what sort of things I'm going to do at this stage, because hopefully it's all fairly similar to stuff we've been doing. And I'm going to add the, what did I call this script? Trigger Unity event. And the Trigger Unity event I'm going to do is going to be on the CM VCAM. That is stands for CM, stands for Cine Machine, and VCAM1 stands for Virtual Camera 1. So we can actually switch between different cameras, which we'll be doing in a little while. But for now, this is kind of the important thing, that we are now going to set our follow to be, we're going to pick this maybe middle domino. Square 8, square 9. So camera trigger, going to drag square 9 into there. So that means once the balloon gets to there, our camera should follow that. And I'm just going to duplicate this. Maybe move it to here, so as soon as this domino should, once it knocks into this ball, hit through this collision volume. And this time our target is going to be ball brackets 1. And you know what? I might even make that... No, that's fine. I was going to say we could make that a bouncy ball or something if we wanted as well. But I think we know how to do that. So if you need bouncy balls and stuff, it should be pretty clear how you do that. I also just want to align this here. Level goal is there. Okay, I think I might have everything set, but I'm sure there's something I'm forgetting. So to check that this is all working, I'm going to go back to my canvas, going to enable my start screen. If you remember, the other thing I need to do is for the ball, I need to turn off simulated. And now if I press play, and actually I'm going to play this maximized to make it kind of clear what's going on. So start game, ball rolls down there, hits the spring, bounces across the platform. Oh, we've got trigger in the wrong place there. Oh, sorry. Yes, we haven't fixed that. So this balloon fan. So we have, at the minute this starts moving straight away because this effector is starting off kind of moving things basically. There's a few things we could do. So one thing is, I'm just going to check if we start this off as, I'm going to have to change the maximize on play mode. Well, let's check actually. If that doesn't start simulated, will it work? No, our balloon's all the way over there by that stage. So instead, what we're going to do is, our balloon mover is going to be simulated in the world. And this effector, this force magnitude we've set to 1. We're just going to disable this component. Okay, we could probably, might actually even be easier to disable this entire game object. So we have the button on the fan, which okay, cool, that is that. Sorry, this is it. So we can call this start fan. And we're obviously following the balloon. The other thing we want to do is set the effector here. And we just go to its game object and we're going to set that to active true. Okay, so that's going to turn on the effector once we hit that. So hopefully this will be a bit more smooth this time. So start game, our ball goes down, hits the spring, slows down as it gets over that area, our balloon's floating there, the fan switches on, our balloon makes it across, our camera focuses on the middle domino, and then our camera goes to there, and we get to the end. And we can hit replay. One thing that's happening there is I think another domino or something is hitting off that trigger volume at the end. Actually, maybe it's not. I just want to check that end trigger. This level goal. Okay, that's fine. So it must be this. Yeah, something is hitting off this again. So all we're going to do here, just to stop that camera issue happening where it jumped back to the middle position, we can just, within this object, once it's done, once it's basically changed the camera, we can just disable itself and set active to false. Okay, basically all we're doing there is saying, like, once you've changed the camera target, don't let anything else, don't change it back to what it is, because what was happening there is I think the balloon had probably hit off that trigger volume again, and it had triggered the camera to follow the domino, the middle domino again. So it goes to here, balloon hits off that, knocks over the dominoes, dominoes hit the ball falls down, ball goes in the hole, congrats, you win. We can hit replay, start game. Great. So now we can file, save. This is our scene. It's probably, yeah, our hierarchy's okay. The one thing I'm just going to do here is create a couple of folders. So scripts, which is going to take this script and this script. That's hopefully okay. It shouldn't matter. Yeah, cool. I think it just had to catch up with itself. I'm going to create a folder called prefabs. And I'm going to put the balloon fan and the spring inside there. Similarly, stuff like the camera trigger could be prefabs, and it just makes it easier to rebuild levels. And we could, like, pretty much all of these things could be prefabs basically, and it means when we change one thing, they'll all change. Yeah. Cool. So just to make sure everything I did there didn't cause any issues, but this is basically it. What I'm going to do is build it out to WebGL. I'll put a link up on the Brightspace so that you can see it, and you should be able to play it and see kind of how it's working. Hopefully you'll also be able to implement this in your own games and kind of create a series of Rube Goldberg interactions. The more different interactions there are, the more interesting. Play around with the Unity physics engine. I'm going to put up a video as well by, it's by Benefati, who's the game designer of Co-op, or Getting Over It with Benefati. He has a great GDC video, I think it was that is about the Unity 2D physics system and kind of fixing some of the issues. So if you're getting some funny collisions or stuff like that, that's basically what I go back to every time. I'm like, oh, is this an issue with some of my code, or is it an issue with like the physics collisions or something like that? So it's useful for doing that. So as I said, this game will be up on itch.io, video, and the projects will all be up on the Classroom as well. Ideally, I want to see a minimum of 5 different phases. So if you look at this one, there's the initial, we've got the spring phase, the fan, and the dominoes. Try and think of other phases you can add to your own project, okay? And then ideally, like, some of your own assets, make it look nice, make it look pretty. This looks kind of a little bit crap. It's got no theming. It doesn't really do too much, but it functions at a pretty basic level. So ideally, you can kind of resolve some of those issues that exist in this kind of very rough prototype. So if you have any questions, just reach out to me on Discord, and good luck with this project over the next week. On Monday, I'll chat to you next week, I'll chat to you in class to see how you're getting on with the exercise. Good luck.